Good evening, everyone. We are very happy that you're here. You joined us here at this important program organized by Chennai International Center. Let me invite Mr. Gopal Srinivasan, Chairman of Chennai International Center, to start the program.
Welcome to the Chennai International Center's discussion on the budget in Tamil Nadu. Normally, when we have a discussion on the budget, it's on the national budget. I think it's a sign of great progress that the budget of the state of Tamil Nadu, starting with an outstanding white paper that was published by the government, has actually become the talk of the town, the talk of the state, and I would say a talk of many other states. It is with these remarks and the statement made by the Honorable Chief Minister in his introductory comments when he started the Economic Advisory Council, whose members are also here today, when the Chief Minister said, "I am speaking of transformation, not reforms," he said. He basically said that do whatever it takes to make the transformation happen. These are words you hear from Jeff Bezos and Amazon. These are words you hear in startups. But it's just outstanding that with those curtain-raising remarks, the Economic Advisory Council, consisting of Nobel Prize laureates and stalwarts from Tamil Nadu, has been formed, and Dr. Narayan, who is a member, a former finance secretary, a close friend, an associate of CIC. We launched his book here at CIC, is here with us today. With this, I am so delighted to invite Dr. Palanivel Thiagarajan, the Honorable Finance Minister of the state of Tamil Nadu, a dear friend of CIC. Both Dr. Narayan and Dr. P.T. Rajan are members, fellows of CIC, and so we take great pride in that, to talk about the budget. Many years ago, it was said that when will the day come when we'll have erudite, qualified professionals from the best institutions in the world acting as our finance minister? Ladies and gentlemen, that day is now. To have somebody who is not only an eminent third generation family member of one of the outstanding political families in the state. I mean, not many people may remember that his grandfather was actually the chief minister of the Madras presidency, and his father was a noted politician. The third generation member who brings that tradition along with modern thinking, an MIT degree, a fund manager, a professional banker, and with a passion for developing the state of Tamil Nadu and its people as its finance minister. So welcome, PTR. Welcome, Dr. Narayan. We're so delighted you could join us, and we look forward to this function. Vanita, over to you.
Thank you, Gopal. Welcome, Dr. Narayan. You may want to start the program. Thanks.
Hi, is it over to me?
Yes, Dr. Narayan, it's over to you to start the program.
Yes. I mean, just set the context and invite the minister to share opening remarks.
Sir, to the finance minister, good evening, sir. It's a pleasure and honor to be with you for this interaction today. In the last couple of weeks, you had over 50 media interactions, patiently explaining and answering queries. And this is to really felicitate you on your clarity and patience all these days. I think what the way we would probably go forward is that maybe you'd like to make some opening remarks, some remarks for about 20-25 minutes, 30 minutes or so. And then we could get into some discussions. But there are just a couple of things that I want to tell the audience here. There are a lot of significant announcements in this budget, which are very different. And I just want to highlight a few. This is not all. You see, one announcement which was reiterated again yesterday is a gap filling for children who have dropped out, who have had a very tough situation in this COVID. And an announcement, there is an Ennum Ezhuthum program, there's a program for teaching them. That's a significant announcement. There's an announcement for setting this MSME committee to look at the productivity, performance, as well as the financial strain of the committee. There's an announcement that OAP will be given to all those people who deserve it. There's an announcement that GST would be going a data-based analytical way to find out why is it that GST revenues are dropping. There's also an announcement to strengthen cooperative banks. I think this is a very, very significant announcement, and that this can become a financing source for the state. Then there's an announcement for more desalination plants along the border, with one at Tuticorin. And there's an announcement for dispersal of industry and more number of Sipcot parks. I don't know whether you noticed all that. These are all, I mean, all very great announcements. But I now request the minister to have his say on what all went behind, what he's planning, what he's going forward to. Minister.
Thank you. First of all, Dr. Narayan, I must say at the outset that one of the great professional privileges of my life is to work with this outstanding advisory council that we have. People who have such a diversity of experience, all eminent in their own way, but from such different perspectives. And what has been remarkable to me, and I think I mentioned in the early stages that when we approached the individuals, we didn't actually tell them who else was going to be on the team. So we actually approached them one at a time. And it's out of their public-spirited nature that they agreed without asking who else is going to be on. And what is remarkable to me is that though there are different perspectives, as you would expect, and that's what we don't want groupthink. But some things come very, very clearly across all of them. Things like protecting the bottom of the pyramid, things like focusing on the MSME sector. That is universal, from Jean Drèze, who I would say maybe within the people that we have, maybe at one end of the spectrum of maybe Esther and John are not that far apart. And then from somebody like Raghu, who spent a lot of his life looking at markets and banking regulations. He still focuses a lot on things like how children get back to school. So, let me start maybe by pointing out that the biggest difference between government and private enterprise, in my opinion, is not the philosophy, it's not the motive, it is the efficiency or the design of the organization. So the greatest difficulty I have is in organizations, in commercial organizations, once everybody agrees that something is the right thing to do, it may not be easy to get there, but once you get there, then it's not that hard to go ahead and execute what you need to get done. In government, not only is it much, much harder to get everybody to agree that something is the right thing to do, but after it's agreed that it's the right thing to do, then there are so many barriers to execution. So I start with the basic philosophy of 2 or 3 things. All over the world, we can learn lessons. We are not that unique. The human condition is quite common across many cultures. And I've commented elsewhere that in my travels around the world, I find that though customs vary a lot, values are almost all the same across so many cultures. And in that sense, it is now, I think, beyond doubt that strong, independent institutions not only protect and support good democracies, but also provide the platform for economic progress and growth and jobs. And there was this debate for a while, which comes first? Does prosperity drive people to demand better institutions and cleaner processes? Or do cleaner processes and better institutions drive economic growth? And I think by now it's very clear, because we've seen some reversal. We have seen countries like the US, we have seen some parts of Europe, where once they were in a much better place, and as institutions are frayed, their economic circumstances are frayed. So I think the cause-effect relationship is a little bit clearer now, and it is towards the side of strong institutions and good processes and good administration leads to good prosperous outcomes. The second thing which I learned, at least during my time in Singapore firsthand, is that if society is structured properly, if harmonious relations exist, if people get along, then of course that helps a lot in economic activity. And as a former consultant before I was in the banking business, though I realized that change is hard culturally, psychologically, and though, systems are broken for a reason, they're not broken randomly, they're broken because somebody benefits from them being broken in that specific way. But still, if the system is fixed, then the outcomes come at a more micro level than the country. And if the system is not fixed, how many ever band-aids and temporary solutions and kind of, short-term what can I say, innovations you bring about, you still are going to end up with the structural problems rearing their head. So the more we spent time in government, the more some things became very clear to me. And the number one is that the last 7 years, and I say this apart from politics, I'm not talking about politics now, the lack of leadership. It is the lack, we may have had our differences with Ms. Jayalalitha. It is what it is politically. But nobody could deny that she was talented and that she had at least some measure of control over the entire administration. And the void that was created by her absence really, really, really hurt the state, our people, and our futures. Because it allowed for this kind of, amorphous aggregation of people who had very little, public interest beyond self-interest. I'm not saying they're particularly bad or evil persons. I'm saying that may happen in any party. It just so happened that that party was in power when that happened. So the consequence of that is that the system is profoundly broken. It is profoundly broken in the sense that there is no accountability, there's no measurability. It would be, shocking in any private enterprise to have this kind of a system where audit reports get filed. And I think I said in the budget, there are something like 2,000 something audit paras in the, open out of the CAG reports alone. And I imagine that the CAG only samples. And so it was very clear to me that unless we attempt to fix the system to some extent, there's no such thing as 100% fix, and what the long term, hopefully we fix step by step. But unless we change direction, unless we change from no accountability, no consequence, no measurement, no data, to something that resembles more like a normal functional working enterprise, then everything else was not fruitful. So the bad news is that, in my opinion, as I said to the MLA's meeting in my party, I said it's almost like, the people leaving have poisoned the well and gone. We are facing a kind of rotten system. The good news is that Tamil Nadu is such a wealthy state, and we have so many resources in so many places, and the goodwill of our people, the average education is so high, the diaspora is so well connected, the talent that we were able to get together in the Economic Advisory Council as an example, that we are not profoundly limited. We are profoundly in a good place, but the system needs to get fixed. And so I think there's a natural progression of what should happen. And though it was not quite obvious in the budget presentation, the priority that I made to the Chief Minister was, let us fix ourselves first. Before we start talking about huge outside investment and job creation and changing the world and changing society and all that, why don't we start fixing ourselves first? Ourselves meaning the government. So I see this as kind of a three-phase operation. The first being, we fix ourselves to some extent, or at least show enough progress that we have something to talk about and something to prove that we are not the last bunch of guys. The second phase is where we now use that to go and attract investment, partnerships, expertise, and start focusing on progressive measures. And the third phase is, if we get that far and if we're actually able to provide opportunities and jobs and growth, then we need to start thinking about some fundamental reforms in society as well, right? Because the political system reflects society. Again, you can say chicken or egg, but my understanding from my 20-30 year professional career is that the culture always gets set at the top. The rot always starts at the top. It's very rare that the system starts decaying from the feet up, as they say, a fish rots from the head down. So if that is the case, once you start fixing the head, then maybe you start trying to look at fixing the body. At some level, as all of you know, in every one of your industries, in every one of your professions, the system is far from optimal on a day-to-day basis, leave alone the role of the government. I'm just talking the government. And those are things that we'll have to think seriously about. As my friend Tharman Shanmugaratnam, the Honorable Senior Minister of Singapore, said once at a Stanchart event that we had him, said, what we have learned is if we fix society, if we engineer society well, then the prosperity comes automatically. And if we don't do that, then no matter what we do, it doesn't work. And he went down to the detail of how they set up the HDB flats and how they make sure that there's cultural integration in the HDB flats, in the primary schools, based on the HDB flat catchment area, from there on upwards. And I think, there are some profound things we have to say. And of course, some of this, it also is a question of style. How do you want to do this? Do you believe that you are such a wise man, or, the Chief Minister, I mean, or such, self-contained, brilliant people that you can actually do this in your head and then roll it out at 8 p.m. or midnight? And we're not. We simply are not. So then the question is, how do you engage the public? And I was of the view, and I think the Chief Minister was clearly happy with that, because he said it himself, and it wasn't that far from his original view, which is that the more we get people engaged in the process, the more of the truth we put out there, the more of the situation they realize. Because we are not asking to do radical things. We are politicians. We want to be liked. We want people to vote for us. We are not going to do things that are so, unsavory that we worry about whether we'll get re-elected. That's the natural tendency of politicians, is to do crowd-pleasing things. Now, only when there's such great difficulty do you do things that you worry may have, adverse consequences in the short term, which will lead to good outcomes in the long term. And so inherently, there's nothing we should be doing that is going to be so painful, such bitter medicine, that we should keep it secret and then release it in a second. So from that perspective, we decided that starting with COVID data, real test data, we better take, we're happier to take a more transparent, more inclusive approach. And the timing of the white paper is indicative of that. We released the white paper 5 days or 6 days before the budget, because we wanted the public discourse to already have digested it, and that content to be reflected in the budget debate that started 5 or 6 days later. And I think it has given us good outcomes, from what we expected, that there is a lot of talk. And by talk, I don't mean at Chennai International Center or, big industrialists and professionals like you. My definition of success is that this talk happens in the villages, in between the auto drivers, at the vegetable markets, in the farms. So that is our goal. And we need to do a few more things to make that happen, but we're politicians. We know how to do that. So we're on our way to get there. But I will just end by saying that, as many positives as there are, and there are many. I mean, Tamil Nadu, again, I say, is a rich state. We have enormous assets. In fact, it's a bit, what can I say, unconscionable that we should be such a rich state and still have people who are having such difficult lives. But the problem we have now is, were we to generate a lot of money, which we can, very short order, very quickly, and we try to spend it, my own perspective is that were I to try and get 1 rupee into some end result, I'd be lucky if I got 50 paisa there. And so that is the limiting factor now. So it's in our own interest that we do the structural reforms. And I would also say that the probably single most frustrating thing I've seen after coming to government is that, as our other advisor, Raghuram Rajan, wrote in his book, Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists, the system is so broken that those who profit or prosper unfairly, democratically speaking, unfairly from the system, the capitalists who have won, then build the moats around themselves and prevent true free markets from happening. That was the premise of Raghu's book. That happens in government also. The few that have arrived at the right place find a way to make so much noise and have so much access into the decision-making, what officially in places like the UK and US are called lobbyists, there's some, equivalent of that happens here. That is very hard to really either get our intent and our communication to the people or their feedback to us. And the noise kind of overwhelms anybody's willingness to take action. And so one of the things that I'm going to be focusing on a lot personally as a politician, as an elected official, as somebody who's connected to the people, who's run a couple of big election campaigns for the DMK, is to greatly improve the communication to the last mile, to the common man. So you're going to see that the government of Tamil Nadu's, communication methods to the voters is not going to be the traditional, newspaper ads alone, once in a few days, a front page ad. We are going to leverage digital media, and we're going to get the government's messages and the government's data and the government's quandaries to the people as, with as great penetration as possible, and take feedback as aggressively as possible, and tailor our actions based on what we hear from the many. We always hear from the few. The few have access to us, but we want to hear from the many. And I think we are very lucky to be at a time where the many, we have now tools that can let us get to the many, if need be, bypassing the few. And, that I think is one of the great advantages we have as a function of time. Or let me conclude by saying what I said to my chief minister. I said, Anna, I'm not half the man my father was. I never will be. But what gives me confidence is that we have such an infinitely, more powerful tool set, communications, data, analytics, systems, that we are possibly, able to do things that better men than us could not, because they didn't have all these tools with them. So hopefully, that's the kind of general direction we're going. In my mind, a budget is a statement of intent, of philosophy, of priority. Where do I want to raise the money from? How do I want to spend it? What am I going to prioritize? It is not really the place to worry about this 100 scheme, that 200 scheme. There are ministers for that. But, it is what it is. The system doesn't change overnight. We're evolving. But I hope and I would like to see that the content of the budget and the nature of demands for grants changes a bit over time, and that ministers actually stand up and go through their demands and then have a fruitful discussion, rather than trying to jam all of this into a budget and then I read for 40 departments or 50 departments things that I'm not in control of implementing or executing or bringing to fruition. So I think these are maybe just a few random thoughts. I'm not sure they were that coherent, but I didn't actually prepare any specific remarks. So I'll just stop there, and better that we take questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. Actually, that was amazingly perceptive and incisive, a different thinking. So I said that is amazingly incisive and perceptive, and a different track altogether. But just let me take you further on one point that you emphasized, and that is institutional improvement. You have pointed out in the white paper repeatedly about the weaknesses in institutions like Metro Water, like Water Board, losing PSUs, and of course the big elephant, which is the Tangent Co. Is there a thinking in your mind of an overarching approach to improving institutions, or would you be tackling it problem by problem? I mean, for example, Water Board, I find, has a huge pension liability, much more than its salary liability, and I can't see why Chennai Metro Water is losing so much money. So I want your thoughts on institutional improvement, sir.
So I think there are two components to this. I think on the revenue side, as I've said in some other interview before, I think the philosophy drives everything, and it is a common philosophy. And the common philosophy that I stated in the assembly is Yellorukkum Yellam Samuha Purladhara Nidikku Yerpa. So we want to provide everything for everybody, not for free, but based on their ability to pay for it or based on their actual need for it. As opposed to what is happening now, and I said that in Tamil again, I said, Yarellam, Yedayellam, Kaipatra Mudiyumo, Adayellam Edutukollalam. So that's basically where we are. So from a revenue perspective, whether it is buses, whether it is water, whether it is property tax, whether it is electricity. Our philosophy is very clear. We want it to be very progressive. We want eventually to be indexed to inflation or something. I made that point again, that the government's revenues are all fixed. They have no correlation to inflation. 60% of the government's expenses, which are salaries and pensions, are effectively inflation indexed because of the twice a year DA reset. So this makes no sense if you're any business owner or any financial company owner where you have assets and liabilities that are both financial. It's ridiculous that you should have this fundamental mismatch between your assets and liabilities, or one indexed and one not. And there's a social justice issue also. Why is it that salaries and pensions of government workers are indexed effectively, but widows and disabled people and senior citizens don't get any indexation, and they've had the same 1,000 rupees for the last 10 months? Are they not subject to inflation? So there are some profound issues. So from a revenue perspective, I don't really think there's that much difference in how you approach the problem. From expense and management and administration perspective, of course, they are fundamentally different problems. At TNEB, the line loss is as much a component as the excessive salary structure. If you take the transport unions, transport corporations, it is a completely different picture. For 1 rupee of revenue, the wage bill itself is 1.5 rupees. Before you get to pensions, before you get to diesel, before you get to the amortization of the buses, for 1 rupee of revenue, you already got 1.5 rupees of wages. If you go to places like Metro Water and Quad, I think these need some one-time reset. They have already done the hard work, which is, I think you point out that either in Quad or Metro Water, one of them, there are 9,000 something pensioners for 2,500 employees. So at least we have automated, we have improved the functioning, we have brought it down to a level where we don't have such a heavy workforce and a labor cost. So the question is, how do you sustain these 9,500 employees? Because relative to the total pension pool of the government of Tamil Nadu, these are not that high. So do we find a way to restructure the pension liabilities and at least let the quad be kind of clean, do a one-time swap or something? So though I think the cost side, the liability side, the administrative side will require unique solutions for each entity. I think the revenue side, the basic philosophy will dictate what will be effectively very similar approaches to improving the revenue picture is what my instinct is.
Thank you, sir. I mean, a lot of questions are coming in. So, but I will just ask one more and leave it to the audience, and that is that there is a picture which also emerges from the white paper, and that picture is that there is a need for improving skills and productivity, employment in the economy, in Tamil Nadu economy. I mean, there's a picture of poor productivity in MSMEs that comes up. There's a picture of poor value added that comes up. And that is that in the IT sector, some higher end jobs are going away to Bangalore and to Hyderabad and other places. I want to know whether there's any thinking on how to address this issue of improving employability and improving skills.
Actually, you raise a question for which I'm going to give a slightly sideways answer. We are actually in a very awkward situation as a government, in the sense that if you look back over the last whatever years since independence, 74, opened our 75th year, and if you look since 1952, since the government of Tamil Nadu or Madras state was formed, I am an aberration in the system. It's usually the number 2 person in the cabinet who has the finance portfolio, or the chief minister itself retains the finance portfolio. I am number 26 in seniority because there's this protocol of seniority based on when you were first MLA, when you were first minister, etc. And so as a second term MLA, and based on coming late to politics and never even standing in election till 5 years ago, I'm number 26 out of 33 or something. What that does is it creates a bit of a kind of tension, because I am not in a position, nor do I want to be in a position where I intrude heavily into other people's kind of ministries or their roles. Of course, I have my views, but for now, I have probably 3 or 4 portfolios that are just such big responsibilities between pensions and finance and planning, which, as you know, includes the Planning Development Council and a few other major initiatives. But most importantly, the HR ministry, which includes the TNPSC, the Vigilance, the DVSC, the Lokayukta, the Information Commission, and all of these big entities. So what I've decided to do is not rock the boat politically and then not try to presume that I know a lot of things about other people's portfolios. There are very senior ministers who've been ministers since the 80s, who've been MLAs since the 70s. So, of course, I give my inputs, but for the rest of this discussion, it might be useful to know that because of this aberration, that the number 26 guy is doing finance, I stick to my portfolios for the most part. Of course, there are initiatives, some of them are announced. Of course, I would say philosophically that we're very focused on productivity as much as I am focused on government employee productivity. Of course, we're focused on improving the productivity. As you know from our Economic Advisory Council meeting, the Chief Minister has a very clear vision. He has said that Tamilnadu should be producing the single most attractive human resources in the world, not just in India or in Southeast Asia. So he has the vision, but I don't want to go overextend my kind of reach. And so I'll limit myself to my portfolios for the most part, if that's okay.
Yeah, that is a lot of humility, Minister, but the ideas will come from person who has the ideas. So we do continue to look to you for generating those. Can I turn to there are a large number of questions. Can I turn to the people who are asking questions? And one of the first questions is, what are the top 3 priorities that are in conflict with your political agenda and your ideology? Interesting.
Yeah, well, I've said clearly that our intent is to do things in an inclusive way, right? So the definition of let's put it a different way. Were we truly the socially just, economically inclusive society that we would aim as our ideal to be, then we have outcomes that are contrary to that. We shouldn't have the kind of corporation and government school outcomes that we have now. We shouldn't have the lack of welfare measures for the poorest and weakest that we have now. And we shouldn't have such a decay in government revenues that we've lost 3.5%, or compared to the 14th Finance Commission's estimates I just read out yesterday in the Assembly. The 14th Finance Commission estimated that the state-owned revenues for the government of Tamil Nadu in 2019-20 would be 210,000 crores. In reality, it was 120,000 crores. And I'm not talking about, this one wasn't a projection from 50 years ago. In 2014, when the commission, 14th Finance Commission, submitted a report, it had a 5-year forward projection that turned out to be 90,000 crores off the reality. Something is structurally wrong, because the economy has not fallen that much. The economy, in fact, if the numbers are to be believed, and you know better than most that these statistics are so delayed in India that it will take us another 12 months before we know what the real GDP number was. But for what numbers we have seen so far, even last year when India suffered a recession, Tamil Nadu did not. I mean, a technical recession, we did not. We had a positive growth rate. But if that is true, then how is it that the government's revenues keep falling? I mean, last year it actually fell. But more importantly, that as a percentage of GDP, it has fallen sharply, even though as a numerical number it has gone up. So I think the outcomes are clearly contrary to the philosophies that we have. We want a more inclusive, more equitable, better basic quality of life provision to the lowest rung of the pyramid. We are not getting that. We are not getting that partly because the government doesn't have enough money to spend. Mostly, in my opinion, because the government is not functioning well enough to know what outcomes it will get if it tries to make any efforts. So those are things that we need to fix. Now, that kind of change is not easy because the system, as I say, whenever a system is broken by intent. It is not broken by randomness or broken by coincidence. So somebody benefits from the system the way it is. And so you will always find resistance when you try to change that. And that resistance will be more powerful than the people who are losing out, because losing out are diffuse and disperse many. And ones who are benefiting, disproportionately are the powerful few. So that's the what do you say, the forces that any change agent faces in any time.
Thank you. There are a lot of questions, but I will just first pick a few which are a little different and which are very interesting. And one of them is just 1 minute. One of them is, what are your thoughts on the universal PDS? How can you ensure that subsidies are targeted towards the poor and the undeserving rich and middle class do not walk away with them?
Yeah, I think we have, maybe I say it a couple of different ways. I am on record in the assembly, and I am more vociferous, as you can imagine, outside of the assembly, where I'm not as constrained by the decorum of the assembly. But I say that it is, in my mind, as much a failure if benefits reach the wrong hands as it is if benefits do not reach the right hands, because we are in a zero-sum game. We are a heavily leveraged balance sheet and income statement state. We are knocking against the limits of borrowing. The previous government had to resort to about 40,000 crores of hidden borrowing because the union government started enforcing the constitutional kind of power it had not enforced before. So in that sense, every rupee we give to the wrong person is as much a failure as not giving a rupee to the right person. And it is very clear. I have no shame in admitting it, that right now we don't have that. But we have said very clearly in the opening, in the printed budget, and then I added one thing yesterday or day before in the reply, that we want to have an integrated database. We're going to bring all the data we have together, from the ration shop, from the voter ID, from whatever other link services we provide, from whatever is within Tamil Nadu's control. First, we want to bring it all together and get a true picture. Some of this requires actually going back to do door-to-door surveys, which we have some interesting ways of how to do that, and which we are going to do what the union government has stopped doing, things like the NSSO, which they've stopped, we are going to do. So some combination of integrating existing databases plus door-to-door surveys and collection of additional information, but also, and so let me finish with that first. So that we hope to create an integrated profile of every household and every citizen to know roughly where they are. Let me give the extreme example of violation. Some of these 4,000 rupees that we gave in 2 tranches for the COVID relief went to government employees who have not had 1 rupee pay cut, who have not had one, lost day on the job for the last year and a half. And we got a lot of criticism for it, justified criticism, in my opinion. But the additional factor that I added in the reply was that a lot of this data is not within our reach. A lot of this data is either with union government-owned PSUs or with the union government itself, like income tax data or oil marketing company data, which, on a one-off basis, I was able to access to just study what was happening to the petrol sales after the tax cut. But that can't be the norm, right? And so I think with the help of people like you and Dr. Arvind Subramanian and others, we want to approach the union government to create a template for union to state data connectivity and data sharing for better governance. It doesn't even have to be individual data at some level. It could be, unmarked data. But at some level, it has to be union individual data, because I've given the example that when we try to do, at the advice of the Economic Advisory Council, when we try to do a third wave preparation by going and overlaying vulnerable population with antibody penetration, with vaccine penetration, we could not get vaccine penetration data, at least at the granularity that we wanted, because only CoWIN has that data. So after we realized that we didn't have that data, we started doing a parallel database so that anybody comes to get a vaccine, we are loading them into a Madurai district database as well as CoWIN. But that is just so inefficient. Anyway, after we had a bit of this debate and all that, the union government has started putting out COVID data by district, by city and all that. But that's not enough granularity for you to manage COVID response. You need to know street by street, village by village, block by block. That data we don't have. So I think we need, sooner rather than later, we need a union to state, for all states, not just for Tamil Nadu, methodology for how we can access the data that will help us govern better. For example, the first people I would exclude from this any benefit is if they were income taxpayers. If they're already at the level of income taxpayers, why should they get basic subsidies like free rice, which is what that card entitles you for? So I mean, I think it'll take time, but I think you'll be surprised that we can make significant progress in the next 6 months. Actually bringing all the data the government of Tamil Nadu has itself, which is in like disparate places and not pulled together. So that should give us much greater clarity and help us clean up the roads.
Yes, that's absolutely, I mean, a wonderful answer, because I think data segmentation is a major problem in policy making. But certainly, I think all of us can intervene to get whatever data from the central sources that you want to attack particular problems. I will put the next 3 or 4 questions together because they impinge on similar things. One is of course, how are you going to be able to improve accountability? How will you tackle the issue of corruption? How will the government ensure quality in implementation? And also that how are you going to make sure that it reaches, I mean, some of it you have answered. How is it you're going to make sure that your final, what you're spending reaches a much greater percentage of the people?
Yeah, so I think, again, you know, we're all, we play the cards we're dealt. I'm 26 in the seniority. But finance is a very powerful thing. So in that sense, I've already announced 2 major changes in the budget. And there are others that will come as we get into the demand for grants. I still got to present my demands for the finance department, for the HR department, which will be relevant to this. But the 2 that we've already announced is that we want to first get basic audit right. Right now, many departments audit themselves, completely unknown to any reasonable organizational design. A department can audit itself. In the case of HRC, the Honorable Court, Madras High Court, has already pointed out that they have an individual who was actually the subject of an audit report when he was a joint commissioner or some level lower, executive officer. And then by the time the audit came for actual action, he was sitting on top of the audit bureau within the department. So he was auditing himself, or basically taking action on himself. So, you know, this has to stop. And at various times, at various places, we have this kind of, assembled by committee, as they say, you know, like a hodgepodge nature of audit. For example, in the finance department, we have one audit called milk audit, completely separate audit called local fund audit, completely separate audit called cooperatives audit, and then something called state audit or something. But, you know, everywhere else in the world, audit is audit, right? The milk audit is not going and actually checking the cow. The milk audit is checking Arvind's accounts. So we have already announced a plan that we're going to, remove all audit functions from their own self-audit, bring it into an integrated unit under the finance department called the Director General of Audit, and eventually homogenize and professionalize this all these different auditors so that there's much less chance of collusion and inbreeding and unwanted relationships developing. So I think there's a lot of room to improve the audit functions. And were we to do that, we wouldn't have so many problems with the CAG, because right now the CAG is the only real audit and many of the local audits don't work. I think there's a component of actually increased transparency and data tracking, which is probably even more powerful. We already have, for the first time, this IFHRMS, Integrated Finance Department's Finance and HR Management System, where every employee's pay records, but also service records are now integrated. This was a big improvement. And I give credit to whoever started it before we came to office. But we're going to ramp that up in a significant way. And there are significant transactions that happen outside of the purview of the government. I don't want to give away too much, but let's say huge amount of money gets shifted to accounts that are not visible to the consolidated fund computers of the government of Tamil Nadu. And then nobody knows what happens. It may be corruption, it may be inefficiency, it may be parked and left for life. You talk to any IAS officer or any government employee, you can tell how many accounts are left opened and left with funds and then forgotten. So we want to ensure that no transactions can happen without oversight or without immediate data recording in a system that we can see. Now, when I say we can see this, let me put a definition of what we can see. I should be able to sit at my desk and tap a button and be able to see it. I, the minister, should be able to see it. That's what a system really gives functionality. The commercial tax minister should be able to sit at his desk and tap a button and see the petrol sales pattern for the dates that I had to spend 4 days and bring 8 people involved to decide, to find out what happened. So this information should be the basis for decision making and monitoring and adjusting policy, which means it should be real time and available. If we do these two things as a kind of carrot to achieve this, I have also announced in the budget itself that this process of having every file come to finance is just ridiculous. It's, we have already allocated the budget. Why should I then keep micromanaging to every single thing? I've been minister for less than 3.5 months. I think almost 800 or 900 files have come to me for signature. It is ridiculous. Some files are worth 2,000 crores, some files are worth 5,000 crores, some files are worth 3 lakhs, some files are worth 5 lakhs. It makes no sense that a finance minister of a state that has a 3,29,000 crore budget should be processing files worth 2 lakhs and 3 lakhs. It's just humanly impossible. So we have said in the budget that once everything is online and we have clear line of sight, every transaction should be visible were I to tap a function, and 100% of the audit control must be within the finance department. If those two happen, we'll just cut all the strings. Whatever's allocated is already allocated as the limit in the system. Therefore, you can't spend more than that. If you can't spend more than that, you sign it yourself and keep moving and don't bring it to us. So I think some combination of improvement of efficiency, real-time data tracking, and much improved audit will help us clear a lot of this. Let me finish by saying that in no democracy can you separate money and politics. Nowhere. Not any country in the world that I know. So the real question is, how do you contain it? Do you contain it? I mean, let me put it a different way. I think when President Obama's re-election campaign came around, back in whatever years ago it was, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, the budget for the re-election campaign was $1 billion. $1 billion didn't come from only people who had no interest in government dealings and no insider trades and no lobbies and everything. It came from all kinds of places. The question is how much of it comes visibly and with accountability, that the quid pro quo cannot be very aggressive. It can be ambassadorships, but it cannot be contracts for defense or whatever. And I think that balance we have to figure out a way. I would say that except for the last 4 or 5 years, especially after Ms. Jayalalitha died, the rest of the time, of course, corruption exists, but it wasn't the debilitating kind of, what can you say, like soul-sucking, system-destroying, evil corruption that we have seen in the last 4 or 5 years. These guys just don't take it from me. There's a ADMK ex-MP called KC Palanisamy, KCP. He has put out one of these interviews recently. I mean, he was interviewed and the video is out on YouTube. I urge you to go look at it. And he explains the different types of corruption there are. And he says there's this kind of corruption that is like election funding. There's this kind of corruption that's like, okay, a bit of it to me, there's that. And then there is Velu money type of corruption, where the whole system is created for him. And the corporations, the Corporation of Chennai, Madurai and all that, as I said in my white paper, which had no outstanding dues 5 years ago, now have hundreds of crores of dues outstanding to the EB, to Metro Water, because they have not paid those bills. Instead, they have used the money to fuel the corruption of these guys. And for the sake of doing this corruption, they made sure that the local body polls didn't happen so that there wouldn't be anybody else to prevent the corruption or ask for a cut. I mean, that is just evil. It is pervasive. It is evil corruption. It is unconscionable. It is unforgivable. That we have to stop. That cannot continue. If you say, can you eliminate money and from democracy? It's not possible. There'll be some margin somewhere. You just can't do it. Nowhere in the world, not just in Tamil Nadu.
Very, very candid and forthright, Minister. Compliments. I will take a bunch of questions together, which is focused on infrastructure. And I will just mention the kind of questions that are coming in. And they are asking, people are asking that, okay, would you be looking at urban infrastructure, and where would the money come for improving infrastructure? They're asking about, are you going to focus on tourism, trying to make Chennai a city like Singapore? Or are you going to look at the coastal belt for tourism development? And there's somebody is asking, why are we still in the metro age and not in the bullet train age here? So these are all with expenditures on infrastructure development. So just like your views on those.
Yeah, again, I'd say that, I shouldn't stray very far afield from my domain, but I would say that there are 2-3 components. Let me start with the easiest example. There was a plan already called the Chennai City Partnership, with partial funding from the World Bank, partial from the ADB, partial from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank in Beijing. And when we came to office, that file needed me to sign. It was due for the June board meeting of the World Bank to get approved. The first tranche, 150 million or something. So I said, no, I'm not going to sign it. Because I saw there were terms in there that if we did not consciously agree with the chief minister, we're going to do that because it would require some messaging and some, political understanding. So the last thing I needed to do was sign. So, there was all this noise that said, hey, if you lose it, you use it or lose it. And the India country limit. I said, listen, it doesn't bother me. People elected me to do the best job I know how to do. If you have problems, it's your problem. Don't tell me that the World Bank can't defer one. No, it's a year. I mean, you do accrual accounting. You do cash accounting. You do accrual accounting, carry it over next year, son. It's not a big deal. So anyway, after we got all that sorted out, we pushed it to the next year. And then we did the political messaging. And what was that political messaging? That was that metering is not your enemy, because that Chennai City Partnership calls for metering. It says, unless you bring the basic kind of discipline that any world-class city has, that you do metering, that you run transport a particular way, that you have this much in property tax revenues, etc., then we are not going to help you. But if you do that, then this is about $1.5 billion. It's a massive project, and some of it is loan, some of it is just, what do you call P4R? It's a performance-based reward where you just get it and you don't have to pay it back. And so, we took a couple of months. We did the analysis. I had internal discussions, got the chief minister completely aware and comfortable. And once we had all of that lined up, we went to the white paper, explained everything to the people, took the press conference, explained and made sure that there was 2 days of, social discourse, that information is the poor man and the common man's friend. Don't think of meter as the first step to billing. Meter is the only way you can escape having these institutions go bankrupt. And only when I know that you're only using X units, can I actually give it to you for free. Once we had enough of that engagement, then I called back the file, I signed it, and it's now going for approval, and we're going to start the project. So it's actually not the money at all. It is the application of mind to fit the right kind of projects and the right kind of funding to the right political narrative, and to take the people along. That's what it is in a democracy, right? If I'm continuously at odds with the people, then I'm not really functioning in a democracy. So you can say it in a bad way and say politicians want to please the crowd all the time. But you can say it in a good way. Say, who am I to make unilateral decisions for what is good for the people? I got elected by 2.5 lakh people, of which 1,60,000 or something came out to vote. Nobody appointed me God. I still got to get the public involved. So I think that money, in my opinion, money is not the constraint at all. I think there are 100 good ideas. I think we are already, just so everybody's clear, we are already the #1 investment destination in India for KFW, for JICA, for World Bank, for a lot of these people, because the money goes where the credit is good, where there's actual traction. And because of a century of our social justice and inclusive growth and education for all, we have by far the #1 gross enrollment ratio for higher education, which is now about 50%. And we have a relatively harmonious society with relatively little tussle. We have, as you say, lots of coastline. We have one of the biggest data connectivity points to the rest of the world. We are reasonable in terms of power and assets and natural resources and mineral resources and all that. So it is only natural that we will be one of the most attractive investment destinations in India and in the world, where they're looking for anything but China. That surely that also helps the broader India macro picture. So in my opinion, and based on at least the 20, 30 years I was in the financial services industry, the world is awash with money. You rarely see deals that go 60% subscribed and fail, or came so close but didn't work. Either it doesn't take off, or it gets oversubscribed 10x, right? Either you have the right framework or you don't. And it's an on-off switch. It's not a 50%, 80% switch. So I think if we do things right in how we manage ourselves, if we have a good story to tell, if we have the results to deliver, we are already well off. We can be much better off. So having good projects with good track record of managing these projects and relatively clean outcomes, I think the lack of money is not the problem. There is a bit of a hitch that the union government is starting to get a bit restive. They have put this new diktat, it's not in stone, but it's unwritten, that says that you cannot have more than one project a year with one state. They tell all these multinational agencies like AIIB or JICA that you can't do more than one project in one state in 1 year. You'll have to spread it around to other states. I can understand where they're coming from, but you know how it is with money. Money goes where the returns are attractive and where the stability is high. So they are, of course, much more interested. Now, you can get around some of these things by structuring off-balance sheet vehicles. I don't want to get into that because the experience that we've had so far is quite bad, actually. But it can be done right, as you know. There are ways to get around those kinds of limitations. But I would say the skill is actually trying to fit the pieces of the puzzle in the right order, time-wise, and ensuring that you do the right things at the right times and don't find yourself kind of caught out unexpectedly with some messaging that you have not planned or not already done. I'll give you an example of bad messaging, just so you see what I mean. There was this issue about some resettlements of encroachments in the path of the river of the 2015 floods that had not yet happened. That building was actually world class. It had been built. It was really good. Everything was ready, but somehow the messaging got lost. And so when the people started shifting, about 8 families or 10 families out of the hundreds of families in that colony started making a big noise about it. And then the press came, and then our coalition partners went, and the presidents of these parties went, and it became a big hullabaloo until some press lady, and this is not the government, some independent press lady happened to go to the actual new apartments and took pictures and videos of people over there. And then it suddenly dawned on everybody, hey, that's actually much, much, much better. And it's not realistic that these people should live in the river basin. But the government just lost it. The government didn't do proper messaging and proper planning on that. And we just took knocks for no reason at all. And it became, kind of tensions with other people. So, this actually, if I had to take an overarching view of this is a tough job. There's not enough people to do the complexity of what we have to do. I have seen what, big global banks look like. A lot more professional people with a lot more infrastructure and a lot more data and systems than we have do a job that is not nearly as complex because it doesn't affect as many people's lives and doesn't have as many different components to it. And so sometimes I just wonder, maybe the design itself is just bad. We have hundreds of corporations, we have tens of departments, we have tens of districts, we have 300 IAS officers. That's it. Every one of them wears like 5 hats or 6 hats or 4 hats. We have politicians that change every 4 or 5 years with no basic training as a prerequisite. It is a tough job to administer these things. And sometimes it is just a mismatch of the complexity of the job and the people available.
That kind of leads me to 2 or 3 questions precisely on the last point you said. And the question is that do you have a thought about replacing IAS with professionals? And let me take just 2 more questions on this. The second is that will you bring in a stock market to Chennai? And the third, of course, is most importantly, why have you stopped wearing 2 watches, the second watch?
It's back. So,
Okay.
I mean, just so everybody knows, this watch I won for 30 years. It had repair and I sent it for repair. This is my grandfather's watch. It was not working. I repaired it once in the 90s and I repaired it again a week ago. This watch I won for 30 years. This used to be without anything. Then it became a Fitbit. Then it became a HR Garmin something. Then it became something else. Now it's actually a phone and a music player and a health monitor and all that. So I wear this to remind me of where I came from, and I wear this because it changes every 6 months. The world is changing all the time. And what amazes me is why people care what I wear. It's not like I wear gold jewelry or drive around in a Rolls Royce. The fact that I wear 2 watches, why should it be of interest to anybody? But anyway, it is what it is. But going back to other question, I'm not in any position to make momentous decisions like replacing or changing anything. I will say one thing. I will say that whatever is within my domain or within my capability, I've already announced that we're going to form a fiscal federalism kind of think tank model. I am in touch with a whole lot of people about the litigation risk management system. Incidentally, though I thought I was the first to think about it, the IMF had recommended that we do this 4 or 5 years ago. I hadn't seen the report. I was not in government. So I can tell you that our engagement with professionals, with highly skilled, highly qualified, patriotic people who want to contribute to the betterment of the state will explode. I will say that we'll have, tens of people across audit, law, finance, other professions, water management, groundwater, any field. I would say the engagement of people to the process will explode. That is clear. Exactly how many and in what way? Clearly, they're not coming as replacements for the IAS. Clearly, they're not coming as OSDs. Most of them, as you are pro bono. So, people, my opposition party made some ridiculous comments. How can they afford to pay such talented people? And I said, it's precisely because the advice of such people is beyond value, is priceless, that we don't pay them. They do it out of the goodness of their hearts. So there are many people in many fields who have already reached out to me. And I assure you that we will use all of them subject to the notion of bandwidth of how we can get it to work together in a way that it doesn't become, everybody at cross purposes or debilitating. But, no structural changes in the administration, huge difference in engagement with professionals. If we have to pay, we'll pay. I've also announced an internship program, as I think you may have seen, which I had already planned to do, but then one of the honorable members, Mr. Easwaran, asked for it. And so we're going to expand it to cover more fields in finance, in law, in audit, in probably the energy department, wherever there's a natural fit, where the technology is evolving a lot, in the IT department, So we'll start that this year, hopefully, and we'll expand it as it goes.
Thank you. Actually, the question lists are continuing to flow in, so I don't know how much time we have, but I'll just pick up again. I'll try to do it in blocks so that you can address themes rather than individual these things. So, one thing is on entrepreneurship. That would you be developing startups? Would you be encouraging entrepreneurship? Do you have any ideas on what you plan to do here? And in a way, slightly related, would you be using your Tamilnadu Industrial Cooperative Bank? Would you be repurposing it for helping out startups or even MSME credit? Are these ideas in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think the very simple answer is those are not my departments. Many of those ideas have already come to my attention, but they're being developed by the people in their respective departments. There's also some funds in my department, in the planning department, under the State Planning Council for Tamil Nadu Innovation Fund or something like that. So there's a lot more we can do, but I have to be very honest. we came for a 5-year term. I am much, much more worried about getting my house in order than I am in being the lead innovator in many things. I understand the value of that. Neither is it my day job, nor even if it was, would it be my priority, because I don't have the comfort. If I try to do something, I don't have the comfort that what I want to do will get done. It may appear to get done, but it may not get done. So till I figure out that my actual system gives me some kind of reliable process outcome, I'm not keen to actually lever it up a lot, at least for the next 6 months before I present the next budget.
Thanks. Okay. Again, a kind of a sideways question. Somebody is asking, can corporates and individuals contribute to repay the state debt?
Yeah, I suppose, but I'm not worried about the state debt, actually, which is a very strange thing for a finance minister to say. I'm worried about the interest payments. The debt itself, yes, we are past the limit of the FRA Act. We have exceeded the 25%. Yes, it's even more appalling that we were as low as 15% 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, and that we have gone so bad. And this is before COVID, we had already reached like 23, 24%. That is just gross mismanagement. But I'm not that worried about, because as you know, the easiest way to fix the debt to GDP ratio is to grow the GDP fast enough that the ratio takes care of itself. We grow the denominator rather than bringing the numerator down. Nobody ever repays debt, right? We're a growing country. The question is, you slow the growth of debt down and you accelerate the GDP, and then you bring the ratio back into. That's what was happening anyway in all the years when we went from 20-something% in 2003 when the FRA Act came into being, and 2014-15 when it, or 13-14 when it reached its best point. All those years we still borrowed, we still had fiscal deficits. There was no year in which we did. In fact, it would be irresponsible not to have fiscal deficit, because we need to make that borrowing to invest in capital. As long as we followed the FRA and had zero revenue deficit, then borrowing up to 3% of GSDP to do capital investments is not just, in my opinion, a ceiling, but also a floor. A responsible government will do it because we can borrow at the cheapest rate of anybody, and because our projects have the greatest return possible, because we do greenfield and infrastructure, and because they have the greatest likelihood of success. There's going to be less rent seeking in the government's projects than there is in private projects. So in every way, so what I'm worried about is the interest. I'm worried that the interest payments are taking such a great portion of the revenues that used to be as low as 11-12%. It's now almost 20% of all revenues, including the union, share of taxes and grants. And that is, it is not sustainable, right? At that level, you are in a debt trap, because you're borrowing to pay interest, because you can't cut spending down that much that you lose 10% of your total. If you go from 11% to 20% of your revenues just for interest, you've lost 9% of your revenues as spending power. No political dispensation will cut 9% in other spending, because 60% is already fixed. It's already wages and pension. So, you can't cut 9% out of 30%, right? It's not viable politically. So that my worry is how I fix the interest. There are many ways. The easiest, best way by far is to raise revenues a lot faster than you raise expending, in revenue expenditures. And I'm fairly confident, because it's just such a rotten system, that were we to achieve reasonable improvements, easily achievable improvements in commercial taxes, in TASMAC, in mining, and some reasonable level of resetting these taxes that have not been reset in 15, 18 years, like property tax and like motor vehicle registration tax, then we should be able to grow the revenue significantly. And that also gives you the salutary effect that because the denominator grows faster, the percentage of interest to revenue comes down, because the percentage interest is already fixed. We already know what our debt is, we know what debt is, we know what our coupons are. So, mathematically it's very clear what you have to do. You have to grow revenues and you have to grow the GDP. The more you grow the revenues, the less you need to worry about borrowing for paying revenue expenses, and you can do more capital investments. And you can get additional external capital. The more you do capital investments, the faster your GSDP grows, your economy grows, all else equal. So the path is clear. I'm somewhat confident we can go down that path.
Amazing clarity, Minister. Thank you. I put two questions together, and then One is somebody's asking, how is the Madurai All India Institute AMS going? And the second, a little more close to my heart, is that are there plans to deal with the regional disparity in development that is becoming visible in Tamil Nadu?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's becoming visible. As you know, the easy question is about the aims. Yeah, I mean, we've already allocated the land. We went through a lot of work, and that was while I was in opposition itself. I did some small part of it, and so really, it's the union government now that has to come forward and give the capital investment. So I hope they will. But so far, nothing has happened. I've not seen any groundbreaking yet. As for the regional disparity, it's not becoming visible. It is highly visible. It has always been highly visible. And so the chief minister is very concerned about it. And he feels like a part of all our philosophies of social justice, economic justice, inclusion, all that must be also regional inclusion, that you can't have everything happen in one place. Now, they expanded the notion of the industrial corridor from Chennai, Trichy, then to Chennai, Madurai, now Chennai, Kanyakumari. The focus of the Tuticorin to Tirunelveli and Tuticorin to Madurai and from there to Chennai also is now quite high. We have announced, and I must say I read more than that I designed, what the Industries Department gave me about specific defense park in Coimbatore, and then the link using that and the feeders to come in the western districts, which are really the most underrepresented districts actually economically are in the northwest, the Dharmapuri, Krishnagiri, the Perambulur, Ariyalur kind of belt,
Yeah.
and then going down south. You know, these are the places where there's actually, of course, Madurai I'd like to see a lot more, but it's not mathematically that much worse than the state average. So the chief minister is very focused on this, and I think we've had this discussion at the Economic Advisory Council as well. It's written into the budget in many ways. But I think what we're looking to do is develop ecosystems around that particular region's special soil or special conditions or special tourist attractions or special industries. So there's a kind of a master plan being developed, again, not in my department, in the industries department, where what should be the main kind of driver of growth in these areas and ensure that we fund different industries in different places and different. So, for example, there's this initiative for a food processing corridor between Nagapattinam and Trichy, on the Tiruvarur Delta, the Tanjore Delta area. So that, is with the extent of the rice bowl there is there and the other farming there, that's something that could improve a lot. So there is a plan. It's not my plan. And I believe that the people working on it will get it right.
Thank you. I think broadly I have covered all lots of the questions that have come. Okay, there's one. This on the Ennum. This is, I would say, the last on my list. The Ennum. How would you be measuring the results of that, in the sense that how would you measure that they have reached the capability that you think that they would have reached?
Yeah, this is a this is a very important topic that we have discussed a lot. And again, I don't want to overreach because it's not my portfolio, but I'll just give you the broad thinking. Including yourself, as you know, and including people like Raghu and Esther and John and Arvind, everybody focused a lot on this, and we were already aware of this. If there is a single long-term kind of structural damage that this crisis will leave us with, beyond, of course, the health and the many losses of life, it is the profound damage to educational outcomes that we are seeing already, and we worry that we have not seen anything but the tip of the iceberg. Right now, this has been reported by many people in many places. Even earlier this week, I saw in the Times of India a story about the increasing rate of child marriages. And we are getting data from other places that the dropout rates are so high in the poorer parts of the state. And in other states, it's even worse. So it is of great, great, great concern and great importance to us, as right up with the health indicators and the fact that things like maternal mortality, which we had assumed was effectively under control. We used to get 0 cases or 1 case a month, in Mother 4 or 5. So as much as that is how do you get people back to school? How many of them have permanently left the school? How do you ensure that, when they come back, the gap of 18 months may be so bad that they come to school and say, I can't keep up, I'm just going home and never coming back. So, Enno Meluttum and all is the second level for me. The first level is the next 6 months. And that's why we have come up with a separate program where we want the education to go to the child's home, because we're worried that not enough children will come to the school. So we are going to bring in all these people who are part-time, volunteer, unemployed, the graduates, people like that, and pay them to go and help children get reintegrated into the learning process. I have 2 boys, and they happen to, of course, they have all the luxuries and privileges, so they go to a good school and they've been okay. But I worry a lot. I worry that the lack of 2 years of social interaction or a year and a half of social interaction and the kind of learning that comes from human, kind of integration, I worry whether it will leave a lasting impact on them. And if that's the case for a guy like me, then you can only imagine what it is. In my constituency, I've tried so many ways and I'm still really, really nervous. So I think the month of September is going to be crucial for us. We are so worried. There's always this hope that children are so resilient and Tamilnadu is so much better off, and we really don't have that kind of need for child labor and child marriage, stuff like that. We hope. But the stats will be very important. Now, the good news is, or the interesting news is, that because it all became remote learning anyway, a lot of people pulled their children out of the private schools where they were paying much higher fees and shifted them to the government schools, to the corporation schools. But now that's a masking problem, because if I say that the enrollment is up overall, I still have to ask the question, how many of the old children have not come back? How many of the old children can continue as if they are going to stay in the same class? How many have to be reset? What are the social consequences of that? What are the community consequences of that between the children? So me personally, I'm very, very nervous. I'm really wondering what's going to happen. And the month of September, October is going to be so crucial for us. I think they've just announced that it's going to open at least for the earlier sections, or whatever, A7, 8 up. I actually wanted to do a lot more on this program. But that's why I said, if you listen carefully to what I said, this is a beginning investment. We will do whatever it takes. Once we discover what it takes or what it needs, then, as I say, there are some things for which you can find money anytime, anywhere, anyhow. And certainly bringing children back to some level of competency. Now, if we do that, then you can start going into what will be the basis of saying they actually can read and write at this level. Should it be this kind of test? Should it be independent assessment? Should it be? But all that is a second issue. My first issue is what happens in the next 2, 3, 4, 6 months. And that is really, as we have discussed, you and I sometimes, and Raghu has been very, very vocal about this every single time we talk. That is the single biggest fear we have is, are we going to lose a generation or half a generation, in terms of long-term consequences of this 1.5 or 2 years?
Thank you, Minister. Forgive me for saying this. I worked in government close to 40 to 45 years with 6 or 7 different ideologies, 2 or 3 prime ministers and different chief ministers. But I've never come across on all these years somebody who's as clear and who has thought through all the issues. And I very much like the approach that you see this as a problem which is not a simple problem, that it needs to be tackled head on. It will take time, and that humility is absolutely amazing. Thank you very much, Minister. And I'll just go back.
Very kind, sir. Thank you. We benefit from people like you. We learn all the time. Every day we learn something new.
I'll take it back to Gopal. Gopal, would you intervene, or Vanita? Who's going to take over here?
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much, Dr. Narayan. This has been an amazing discussion, and I still see that we've had phenomenal attendance. At the peak, there were nearly 150 people. There are series of unanswered questions. We've covered ground, going through subjects which are of humanistic interest, of economic interest, of developmental interest, of social interest, political interest, and this has really been one of the finest sessions we've had, focused on the state of Tamil Nadu and where it can go. So thank you very much, Minister, for all your most candid remarks as always, and all your insightful remarks, and Dr. Narayan for so skillfully as always, deftly managing the many questions and drawing insights from this conversation. We hope to see both of you again, and most importantly, we hope to see Tamil Nadu's growth, which has been emphasized so much in this discussion, speed ahead of the rest of the country and to reach its full potential, so the citizens of Tamil Nadu may absolutely benefit from all these policies. Thank you once again, and thank you, our audience, for joining us today. And I wish you all a very good evening, and I wish that we will see this new dawn in Tamil Nadu as soon as possible. And very good night to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Dr. Narayan. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
And we have been very live on Twitter, so all of those who follow the feeds, please enjoy them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.